Hi, Joe Cerrone.
And Alan Rosen.
Welcome to CAD 107, Introduction to 3D Printing, in our weekly Zoom classroom meeting. Alrighty, so we've released our last lab, which will be lab number 10, and it's going to be to create a ring with a logo in it. And for this project, we have an option to create it with what's called dual extrusion. And dual extrusion is covered in our textbook, chapter 7, when we talk about 3D models. And so as we look at tying the textbook into our lab material, we're looking at these different ways to input our geometry. And one way is with scanners, and they talk about how scanning technology works with 3D printing. It's not as accurate as CAD is. And so they actually talk about scanning and creating these point clouds and what's involved with creating those scans. And then it goes into creating multiple extruder files. And this is right where we want the course to go. And so when we look at multiple extruder files, what we're looking at is what's called dual extruders. With the Dremel 3D 45s, we have one extruder. And with the Ultimaker and with the Maker Gear, we have two materials that we can extrude. And so they go through an example here with Tinkercad where they have a couple of different geometries. And then they tell you how to set it up for dual extrusion, which I'll show you as well today. And so we'll be using Cura. Cura is also free. You can just Google Cura download and you can download that. And then what they're doing is they're showing how they bring the models in and they assign it to an extruder. And so the green will be assigned to extruder number 1 and the yellow will be assigned to extruder number 2. And then they show the tool paths in the simulation and they run through a print for it. So if we take a look at what we're going to be working on, on these different files right here, we've been getting a lot of work done from a standpoint of, getting the tape dispensers. The tape dispensers came out very nice. You're welcome to make a little bit of a change here. And if you want to add some type of a cutter, like you would see on it. This one's metal, but you could certainly zigzag pattern using CAD and have them on the end of it here. And then, make sure that you emboss and engrave your files for pickup. I'll be printing those out and putting those in the blue bin. Look at some of the other projects. Here's our memo pad. Again, some of the quirks and things like that as we look at it. This text was created with an extrusion. Super easy to read when you get down to creating text in 3D printing. You get into resolution issues. Look at 3D printing with dual extrusion. You can see here's an example, and there's some examples in the PowerPoint that I have in module 10 for assigning one of the extruders this color red and another extruder to the green. Create that. What we're going to do is we're going to create these rings here in extrusion or pause at layer height. Pause at layer height will allow us to pause the printer at the layer that's, we change colors here. And then what you do is you just change the filament out in the machine different color on it. There's not a lot of layers involved in the ring design, so you have to really watch it when you get to that layer height. But it's a good technique to be able to have dual extrusion, dual colors. As we look at it, some of them are better than others. And what I'm finding is it's really better to flip the model over onto the glass side of the build plate because you'll get a smoother logo image. So oftentimes, rather than print them standing up like this with this support material and with this build plate adhesion, I think we might be better off printing it up upside down, and then we would have a nice smooth surface here. Since the leaf sticks out, we would need support material so that it is flat. All right, so let's get started. If we take a ring, we can basically go in and take a ring, take our micrometer, zero that out, make sure that we're working in millimeters, and then you can go through and you can measure that, come up with your ring size. And so I'm at about 20 millimeters for the ring size that I'm going to create. And you can create different sizes if you'd like to, print out a couple of different ones. This one's 15.8 millimeters. So 15.8, larger one. It's a little too large. Let's take a look at the D2L content. So as I was saying, the chapter 7 does go through and talk to you about how to create these dual extrusions. And let's go and turn that into our lab. And so as we look at lab number 10, created a video last night of how to work with dual extrusion right here. It's on YouTube, and you're welcome to look at that. The difficulty is lining up the different layers in the Cura software or in the slicing software. So we look at lab number 10. Here's our 3D model. And so if we click on this, our lecture for designing for 3D models. This mirrors chapter 7. We talk about scanning using an Xbox Connect. It's actually kind of neat. It actually does work if you want to scan yourself in and put yourself on a birthday cake or something like that. And then downloading models. You can download models from Thingiverse, UImagine, PinShape. A lot of the maker spaces in the schools are just having open lab time where they will show people how to download models that have already been created. And then as we continue working and looking at some of these other aspects, we're modeling with CAD, AutoCAD, Fusion, and SolidWorks are the files that we're receiving. And so what we'll do is we'll set this one up to use multiple extruders. And so this is an example of an Ultimaker where we would assign an extruder. And they talk a little bit about dissolvable support because this is a lot nicer than having to go through and chip the material out. And so if you're going to go into 3D printing and purchasing your own, start to look at the next generation of 3D printers, which is dual extrusion. And so here's an example of a 2-color print where one would be assigned to one extruder and the other to the other extruder. And that's our summary. Back to the main splash page. Here's our project file. And the module is 10 now. We sometimes mix them up a little bit, but regardless, essentially what we're doing is we're just modeling this ring shape. Rhino, as far as their software, it's a CAD program much like AutoCAD. And then here's our dimensions for the ring. So it's 19. They've got a 16 millimeter inside diameter. I would probably update that to 20. They put a little bit of a taper on it. And so you have this basic ring shape. We have tutor files for that. So here's our tutor files. And what you can do is you can download that. Open it. So here's our tutor files, and I make these the same as I have with the other ones, where I'll go through and I'll show how to create it from a 2D to a 3D. And so if we go to our top view, get this in wireframe, you can see that I've gone and created the two-dimensional geometry for the ring, 20 millimeters tall. And then here's our geometry. And then as we create it and clean this up, you can then extrude it. Rotated it. Then I came up with the oak leaf. And with the oak leaf, the difficulty is getting the layers to line up. And so you can create your own ring without the oak leaf. It's in the video that I posted yesterday. But I'm going to take this piece right here because it's not been subtracted. And so what we're going to do here is we're just going to make a ring with a big sphere in the center of it. And so to do that, what we would do is, this is fine the way that it is. I'm going to take out the leaf. Remember, you can always just download another one. And so I'm going to delete that. And then I'm just going to go and draw a line. And what I like to do is I like to put a toolbar on for AutoCAD properties. So I can change the color without changing the layer. And so I'm just going to make a red color here. And I'm going to draw a construction line using an O snap that's going to allow me to find the center. And so I'm going to snap from here to here. Escape. And I'm just going to use a 3D work environment. And I'm going to just create a sphere. And so you can create whatever you like. I'm just going to create a sphere. And I'm going to create that sphere at the midpoint of that line. Like that. Shift middle mouse wheel, and I can kind of see how that lays out. When AutoCAD represents solids in wireframe, it simplifies the geometry. But you can switch over to conceptual and see that. And then what we need to do is we need to use 3D Builder to be able to line this up for extrusion. So what we're going to do next is we're going to export two different files, one for the ring base and one for the sphere. And then we're going to line them up in 3D Builder and then bring them into Cura. So we will export ring base, and I'm just going to export it to my downloads. I'm going to call it ring base. Call it ring base 1 because I may have more. And I'll hit save. And then I'll select the geometry. Now I want to take the one that doesn't have any indents. And I'll hit enter. All. So again, we'll put those in our downloads. And we select the ball by itself and hit enter. That's it. Now you can come up with your design. You can have multiple different geometries here. We're going to go into 3D Builder and we're going to open up our download. Ring base. It's going to come in millimeters. So we'll check mark this. And as you can see, it's just a plain ring shape. We'll click on it and then move it to a position of machine 0. What we're doing is we're tying in the 3D coordinates to the machine in the software. We're not too concerned about Z. And then as we zoom back, here's our file. So there we have our ring base. And now we're going to insert the ball. So we'll say add, load an object. It came in a different unit, and so we want to make sure that we tell it it's millimeters, and so it will make it to the same scale as the other part. And then we'll green check mark it or just check mark it. And again, we'll put this at machine 0. So we'll say 0, accept that. Leave the Z alone. We're not going to worry about that. And this is the interface that will tie in to be able to center view, tie in different geometries. And so as you can see, the ball is at the bottom, and all we'll do is use the move command, and we can just move that up. And I'll say right about there. That's where I want that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to subtract one from the other and export it into the slicing software. This is how we're going to line up the geometries for the slicers so that when they come into our slicing software, they line up. For some reason, they don't line up when I export them as CAD files. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my object, and I'm going to subtract out one of the shapes. And so I'm going to say subtract. And I've subtracted the ball from there, which is what I want to do because this is all going to be filled in with a different color on the printer. And then I'm going to save it. And so I'm going to go save as. I like the STL formats. 3MF is newer, but I haven't really. And so I'll call this ring base, and I'm going to call it ring base 2, and I'll save it. Continue, it wants me to use the 3MF format. And then I'm going to undo. Then I'm going to delete the other part of the layer. And so I'm going to delete this. I'm just going to hit the delete key. Whoops, undo. So right now I have both of the objects selected. I want to unselect one of them and unselect the other. And then I'm going to select the ring base and delete that. I want the position recorded. That's the thing that the 3D builder does, is it holds the coordinate location. And I'm going to save this as an STL file. And so this one is going to be call this one 2. And it wants me to use 3. Now we're going to go into our slicing software. Undo this back to where I had it. You can save this and turn this in if you like. You can save as. You can save this as a 3MF format. Turn that in as well. I'm going to minimize this, and then we're going to look at Cura. I've got a new installation, so I think we'll be okay. You can see I have 2 extruders, extruder number 1 and extruder number 2, and it works very much like the Dremel software. I'm going to take my ring base, I'm going to open that, There it is. It comes in on my screen. Tells me it can make that in 18 minutes. And then I'm going to bring in the ball. I click on the ring base. I right mouse click. I can see that it's set for extruder number 1. And then I'll click off of it. I'll click on the ball. I'll right click and I'm going to assign that to extruder number 2. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to combine these. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Shift and click on both of them so they're both highlighted. I'll right click and I'll say merge models. That's it. We're set to be able to print this. We can go through some of our print settings and be able to set that up. Preview it. See that I have support material enabled, which is basically all I really wanted to do. If I was going to print this, as I talked about, like with a smoother setting, I could flip it over upside down and use support material, but this looks just fine. So we're going to save it to a removable drive, and then we're going to print it. And so I'll say save to removable drive. Then I can eject my USB and we can then print that file. Alrighty, so that's how we would create the ring using dual extrusion. It's not a real complicated process, but it's a 3-step process where you have to take your CAD file. You need to export the ring base and then the geometry that you're going to for the second extruder. And then you want to bring them into 3D Builder, zero out the X and Y position, subtract out one geometry from the other, and then export them, and then bring them into 3D slicing software and assign an extruder to each of the different components. Back to the main splash page, as we take a look at our course and where things are at, Module 10 will be our last module. And then as we look at our days and our times, next week we'll make the practice test available. So that'll be available on the 26th. And we'll go through and we'll review the chapters from the textbook. Make sure that you complete the quiz questions from the end of the chapters. And so we have these questions from chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we will cover up to chapter 7 or 8 as we look at the content from the textbook. We're very project-based here as we work on things, but the final exam will be similar to the midterm. You'll be able to use your book, you'll be able to use your notes, but we want you to be able to some research and to be able to talk about the different types of material that we have covered from our 3D printing and prototyping textbook. Remember that student help is available. You're welcome to come in on Wednesdays, Thursdays, a virtual meeting on Friday, or coming in on Sundays to the Skokie campus. And that's basically it. The course has been going really quite well. If you have any questions, be sure to send us an email and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Al, is there anything else that we want to cover before I end the recording and post it?
Not at all. You did a great job today.
Alrighty then, I'll stop the recording and then we'll open things up for questions.